of our discussion this afternoon is dropouts after class. I expect we'll have some more people wandering in, but we might just as well get started. We are pleased to have this afternoon to share their thoughts with you as a means of getting discussion started. Bob Wilson and Gary Shoemake. And I am Jim Mayo. We will start off with a brief presentation by each of us, and then we hope that you will become interested in the topic and will either ask questions or make contributions of your ideas regarding the topic that we're discussing. We had some communication about what we might present, and in the course of that we concluded amongst the three of us that the real problems that result in dropouts after class occurred during class by way of less than superlative teaching. But since our topic is the time after class, we have accepted the challenge of not really being able to lay the blame there exclusively. We presume that the session that Eddie Mayo chaired this morning dealt with some of those problems, and so we will attempt to target our discussions on the time frame after graduation. A brief outline of what we're going to do. Bob will be talking to you first about some of the dancer issues, and in the course of discussing our program, Gary and I discovered that we sat on opposite sides of a topic which comes up fairly regularly when callers get together, and that is the advantage or disadvantage to square dancing that has resulted from the identification of dance levels by CALLERLAB. And we're going to let Gary take the first shot at that, presenting his view that some of the problems and dropout issues are the result of the establishment of levels by CALLERLAB, and then I will share my thoughts on why I feel that the establishment of levels has been a help toward retaining people in the square dance program. And we hope that that will pique your curiosity and encourage you to join into the discussion. I don't know that we're aimed at any conclusions. We hope that we will stir your thinking and perhaps share some information amongst us. Without any further comments from me, I'd like to introduce Bob Wilson, who is from Waukegan, Illinois. He calls and teaches a local club program, including material from beginner class through the +2 workshop level, and travels in the north central area of our country. He's been calling 10 years, and why don't you talk to him, Bob?
Thank you, Jim. As Jim said earlier, that the three of us had kind of bantered back and forth yesterday at lunch over this topic, and decided that the biggest problem was of dropouts was during class. My opinion on that was that sufficient time spent in tender loving care with our class people, both in positioning, timing, styling, what have you, I think we would experience a higher level of retainees. But our issue today is how to retain after class. Retain those people we're losing after our classes are over. I think a definite problem exists today throughout the country. I know it does in my area, in the Illinois, lower Wisconsin area, that dancers are being graduated with a 20 to 25 weeks of course in basics, the mainstream program, and possibly quarterly selections, and they're being turned loose, unprepared, frustrated, and ill at ease, simply because not enough time is spent with them. They graduated to, in most cases, a club whose advertised level might be mainstream quarterly selection, yet there are smidgens of plus 1 and 2, and possibly some advanced figures being called. And this, to the new dancer, is frustrating, for they come back to their home club caller and say, "What is this? You taught mainstream quarterly selection to me. I went to a dance last night, advertised quarterly selection, and I got load the boat, relay the doocy, AC doocy. What are these? We've never done them before." I think we have this problem. I don't think it's unique to my general area. They are also plagued with the problem of having no place to relax and enjoy mainstream as such. We've discussed this problem in our Callers Association many times, and a lot of times that ends up just lip service. They say one thing and do another. We find clubs that advertise mainstream and quarterly selection have started adding the plus 1 and 2 figures in their program, whether it be the caller or club pressure on the caller. They started these star tips, either in the middle or at the end of the dances. And what happens to the poor old mainstream quarterly selection dancer come 10:45 when they call that last tip? They've got their hat and coat on leaving the dance. And you have in most cases, a minority of 1 or 2 squares that can dance plus 1 and 2. And that's star tip. New dancers cannot understand why after 25, 30, or 40 weeks of lessons they are being bombarded with figures that are not familiar to them. The Good Samaritan seasoned dancer sits down with them and pressures them into joining workshops shortly after they've just completed mainstream lessons. And in most cases, they know not what's happening. They're talked into the workshops. In some cases, some of them get through it before they even are comfortable in the mainstream dance program. Good portion of the clubs are advertising plus 1 on up, where there are newly graduated mainstream dancers. They either go to workshops in the plus program to endure the frustrations of learning new material again, or dropping out because there are other recreation that they don't have to worry so much about and have to learn so much to do and enjoy. We have clubs that do not advertise levels at all because they do not want to be held to a particular level. This is frustrating to the new dancer. They don't know what to expect at these dances, and some avoid them. Some that go to them are frustrated afterwards and are very disillusioned and drop out of square dancing in some cases. How is the dancer to know what to expect at these clubs that are not advertised? We as callers, and I'm not eliminating myself from this either, are trying to show dancers what we can do, not what the dancers can do sometimes. What is our attitude as a caller? Are we trying to perpetuate our ego? Are we as callers, we must examine our motives and our attitudes. Time and time again, I've seen callers challenge the floor until he has broken down the last square. Who wins this kind of attitude? You're going to lose the dancers, and you're going to be the loser in the long run. We as callers should make our dancers aware of the different plateaus of dancing and approximately the time, the span necessary to achieve competence, or possible excellence in dancing before they move on. I feel we are working our dancers to death, trying to elevate them to a level they may not even feel comfortable in most cases. In areas where mainstream quarterly selection is almost nil, we as callers must convince our dancers of a need for a mainstream level to keep our activity strong. I feel myself that the mainstream program is the life's blood of the dance scene. Callers find it easier to call higher level than the mainstream with good variety. Dancers need variety, not complexity. I find callers in our area trying to stay within the plateau and find themselves drifting into the plus program from a mainstream dance. And I know you probably have too in your area. I don't know what the problem is, whether they don't have enough variety in the mainstream program set up for themselves, or whether they just want to feel more comfortable in a higher level. But we're doing our mainstream dancers a disservice, really. I think callers should stop pushing dancers through workshops that they have no business being in. Time and time again, and I run a +2 workshop. We have dancers that have not danced a year or two in the mainstream program before going into the plus program. Let me tell you, it's frustrating for the dancers as well as the caller to try to teach these people. Sure, they can learn load the boat, possibly relay the deucey, but they have, when you drop back to the quarterly selections, you've lost them. Call simple turn-throughs and you lose them. So I strongly urge that you urge your dancers to dance the quarterly selections or mainstream program at least a year or two prior to moving them into the plus program and higher. I think the caller should do his part in making his program more interesting, giving variety, and as I said, not too much complexity to the dancers. In the long run, I think you, as a caller, will be a winner along with your dancers. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think there are certainly some interesting ideas there for us to meditate on. And now let us move on to the first round in the discussion of whether the CALLERLAB level identification program has helped or hindered us in the effort to keep people dancing after they've graduated. To talk to you on the negative side of that, I'm pleased to introduce a gentleman probably most of you have heard of, Gary Shoemake, who spends his time divided seasonally between Pharr, Texas, and Dallas, Texas. Records for, what's that company? Chapas, one of those. Chaparral, I guess it is. He calls in a recreational vehicle park, and in that setting, calls for programs from beginner class through the advanced level. Been calling 18 years, and he's traveled the country from end to end, and on the basis of that experience, probably knows the whole picture far more completely than any of the rest of us. And it's with great pleasure we give you Gary Shoemake. If anybody's listening in the control room, would you make an effort to turn on mic 1? We could use it for floor conversation later.
Thanks, Jim. I question that last statement, whether I know as much as anybody, really. The more I delve into it, the more I keep coming up with blind alleys. But in putting some thought to it and thinking about and in working with our beginners, the question come to me, when are we going to realize that the general U.S. public, or worldwide public as far as that goes for the people outside of the United States, do not want to give up 2 years of their entertainment life to become a square dancer? It's just really not that interesting to them. When you start it with that thought in mind right there, you immediately eliminate about, I would say, over, just guessing, 75% of the people that has come in contact with square dancing, or couples who square dance, and that is our lifeblood, is their friends who bring them into it. If their friends tell them, hey, this is really fun, this is really great, come on out and join us, they say, hey, all right, we'll do that. How long will it take us to do that? Oh, a couple of years. Well, very quickly they lose interest, If you don't tell them, that's the key thing right now, it becomes a con job, okay? We don't tell them. Well, we don't know. It'll take a while, but some people takes less than others, and you hedge, and you con, and you try to keep them there. And that remaining 25% will say, hey, okay, we'll give that a try. And so you continue on through your suggested 42-week or 42-lesson course, whether it be one per week or what have you. And I doubt very seriously that a very small percentage of the callers in CALLERLAB actually give 42 lessons because they feel like that they are better teachers than that. That may be true in whichever case, but we'll say 25 weeks that they can teach those people to dance the mainstream list in 25 weeks. About after the 10th week, and you're still hedging, you got some problems there too. That becomes a dropout problem before you ever get through your 25, if we say it's 25. After you get them through the 25 or the 42, with what you have remaining, they say, hey, boy, we made it. All right, let's go. I'm going to go dance with my friends. Well, now, wait a minute. We got to get you on these quarterly selections. You're really not ready to go just yet. We need to give you a little bit more work on these quarterly selections. And he says, wait a minute now. I've given you 25 to 42 nights or sessions right here, and we're not there yet. And so, well, it's just a little extra things that some of the callers call. I don't want you out there and not feeling adequate about it. So if you come to these workshops for a little while, we'll get these quarterly selections in there. Or maybe you already got the quarterly selections in your classes. Maybe you did. In either case, they say, all right, now we got the quarterlies, we got the basics, we got the mainstream, we're ready to go dance with our friends. Well, the only problem is, while you've been doing this, your friends have been going through the plus 1 and 2 workshop, and they're not dancing mainstream anymore. And they've moved on up the list there, so you really can't dance with your friends. So you stay down here. You don't really need to go up there and dance with them because you haven't been in the activity long enough. You need to spend another year down here at the mainstream level before you consider the plus level. But my friends are up there. Well, that's okay. You stay down here with this. 2 things happen right then and there. They either quit or they go ahead and go through the plus with someone else, or you break down and let them come into your plus rather than lose them to someone else. And all the time that this is going on, if they don't do that, all the time that they're dancing at the mainstream, if they stay at the mainstream, and their friends stay at the plus, maybe you got the hook in there really good. They're going to make it out. But by the time they get through their mainstream, or the time they get ready to go into the plus, their friends have already maybe started into an A1 workshop. So the thing that brought them into square dancing to start with has moved right on up the line, and they won't come back. Now, you can say what you want to, And you and I well know that those people that dance up there don't really like to come back and just dance mainstream. They don't really like to just come back if they're advanced dancers and just dance plus level. And they really don't just like to come back and dance advanced if they're challenge level. They will do it. They will do it on occasion, and they'll smile on occasion, but they don't do that very often either. I am not sure, if you were at the quarterly selection meeting this morning, you heard me make this statement again. I am not sure that all the work and effort that we have put into our program for CALLERLAB in the last 7 to 10 years, 9 years, however long it's been, and it's been a tremendous effort, and I don't take that away from anybody. And we've all gotten together and worked towards one common goal. But I'm really and truly not sure that it's not time to back off and take a great big long look and reassess which direction we're going. Because in all avenues that I look at, I see us building first of all, I see us restricting the input into square dancing strongly with the required amount of basics that they must learn, and with the additional levels on top of that they really should get into before they can go on. And along with these same levels, I see us just building a stair-step program into the advanced and challenge level, and that is not what our aim is to do, I don't think. I think we've had a very strong input from that minority faction, a very vocal, strong input from that minority faction, and I think we have been maybe misguided a little bit along those things, or let ourselves be misguided about it. At the point of being old-fashioned and an old fuddy-duddy, I look back at what we had before this. We had 50 to 75 basics that they had to learn to square dance. And the chaotic problem with that was that without the list, all of the experimentals and everything that everybody was upset with, because Gary Shoemake came into town and called a dance and he used XYZ figure. And those dancers came to their own caller and said, "Hey, how about this thing Shoemake used, this XYZ? That's pretty good. Why don't you use that?" Well, XYZ didn't fit his program one bit. Didn't even get close. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. Just was there. And he got very tired of hearing that coming back to him. So let's do something. Let's all get together and do the same thing. But in doing that, the difference being the thing XYZ that the guys were coming in and doing, the strong ones stood the test, and the other ones went their way. The statement that I made this morning, that if you've been dancing 10 years, sometime within that 10 years, you have been workshopped to motivate and spin chain the gears and relay the deucey. Workshopped it. If you don't dance at the advanced level or the plus level, you have been workshopped through it sometime or another. And maybe you enjoyed it, maybe you didn't, for the time that it was used. But when it was used back then, it was used for that sole purpose, and those calls went by the wayside. Granted, something else come along, but it was not a permanent situation. The situation that we have created right now with the levels is a permanent situation. We still have to live with relay the deucey, motivate, which actually stood their test and was passed on through the mainstream of dancing. I'm not talking about the mainstream level of dancing. I'm talking about the mainstream of dancing at that time. They took the test. Some of them stood it and stayed around for a while, and some of them took the test and didn't stay around at all. But in most cases, all except the 75 basics, sooner or later, went by their way. Most of them on up to the challenge or advanced level, whatever it was at that time. I can't remember what it was at that time. And we were not bothered with it again. But now that we have the levels, it is there, on permanent black and white record all the way through. You have got a list that you must contend with for the rest of the duration. It is there. You cannot get rid of it. It will not go away. You cannot ignore it. It is there, and we have to live with it because this is what we have set aside right now. And I am firmly in the belief that the American public doesn't want that much material. I think we are feeding our egos to the point that we think that square dancing should be taught in a 2-year period and all of that, but no one wants that. Compare it to bowling. What would you do if you went bowling? If someone said, let's go bowl, and the guy says, well, that'd be great, but you got to take 40 lessons before you do that. And you say, well, okay, I'll do that. So you take the 40 lessons, and he said, well, wait a minute, there's 9 more that you got to go. Besides that, there's 53 variations of what we just taught you here already. And then after you get through that, you get into this semi-advanced session right here. Well, wait a minute. The guys coming in from the street, off the street to bowl, they don't want to hear that. Wait a minute, I'll go find something else to do. I think this is our greatest problem that we have right now, and I think it's something that we should contend with. If you took a couple of square dancers and started at the East Coast and went across to the West Coast, and they went into a different town every evening and an open dance, I think you would find the mainstream of dancing, not the mainstream level, but the mainstream of all clubs that they would come in contact with on an open level would be somewhere mixed between +1 with maybe 1 or 2 calls from the +2 level in there on it. So you're talking about 68 basics with 53 variations within the family, and until a few minutes ago, 9 quarterly selections, plus, how many is on the +1 list? 17 on both lists. It's +1 and 2.
No, 25.
25? Okay, 17 on the +1. And a few more calls that kind of throw in there, relay the deucey, we'll take that one off of there too, to throw in there with it. How long are we going to kid ourselves to the fact that we're going to get people to come in and go through this program and be a part of us? They're not interested in it. You wouldn't be interested in it if you hadn't started out a long time ago. The majority of you, there's a few of you here, and thank goodness for you. A big majority of you would not be interested in it if you had to look at it in the eyes that the new beginners and the new people that we're bringing into the activity right now have to look at it. Along 20 years ago, when I learned how to square dance, it took me 3 weeks, and I was there. Wasn't very good, but I was a part of it, and I was dancing with my friends, and it has evolved into the situation that we have today. To make it very brief and bring it to a conclusion with, I think, a general summary of my thoughts, I'm not sure, and I welcome your comments as Jim will agree with when he presents his opposing side here just a moment. I'm not sure that we have accomplished really what we've set out to do. We may have accomplished it, but I'm not sure that it is in the correct general direction that is going to benefit the overall picture of all square dancing. To be very strong in my last comment, I would like personally to see them take everything on the plus list and above and give it to challenge, and everything below to mainstream. And there would be no levels in between. Let them take all of that junk and go on. I'll test the new stuff for them, and anything that they like, they can have it. But we don't have to keep it. We do not have to retain it, and it can go on its way. As I told Jim earlier, I think the biggest mistake that we made when we come into town and taught X, Y, Z figure is the fact that we did not put a disclaimer on it in saying that this is to be used tonight for my program only. It does not by any means require that your caller accept it or not accept it. It may not fit his program. Do not require him to do it. If he feels like it does, it will. And if he doesn't feel like it will, then forget it. Well, it's all right. But we didn't do that, and it became a big problem. But in trying to solve that problem, I'm not sure that we haven't created a bigger one. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim and let him give you his opposing views of it, and then we're going to open it up to your discussion. Okay?
Thank you, Gary. Gary's just done a very nice job of stating my view. I would like to look at exactly the same situation that he describes from the other side of the problem, and I note that many callers who are here have never experienced square dancing in the absence of CALLERLAB. Many of the callers who are present at this year's convention have been calling less than the 9 years that CALLERLAB has been in existence. And perhaps some of you either never experienced or have forgotten what the problem that Gary described felt like to a club caller in my case it was Topsfield, Massachusetts, after not particularly Gary but any number of traveling callers had come through town on Saturday night, and often on Monday night when my club workshop met for their weekly dance, the members would come to me with a list of 5 or 6 terms that I had not taught, saying, Joe Schmunk called in town last Saturday. We went down to the dance, had a great time, but we couldn't dance what he called. Why haven't you taught us? And then they would list AC-Deucey and Motivate and all those things that indeed have been workshopped over the years. I agree absolutely with Gary that if Joe Schmunk and his fellow travelers had put the disclaimer that Gary stated before each of those calls, we probably would never have had the CALLERLAB level system, because it was to address that problem that the level system was created, to try to organize so that dancers would have some idea what to expect when they went to a dance. It is my view that we have accomplished that goal, that my club dancers, who in that particular club dance at a +2 level comfortably, would have a clear idea of what they would be expected to know. And now when Joe Schmunk comes to town and introduces a call that's not on the advertised level for the dance that the people are attending, he teaches it first. I think the best of the traveling callers always taught it first. Unfortunately, they were not all that good, and they caused me as a local club caller a great deal of anguish I in fact went to a dance once at which one of these gentlemen said, if your caller is doing his job, he's taught you this one, and then proceeded to call the latest and greatest new thing. I got very red in the face and left the hall to avoid hitting him, because I didn't think that was a good way for him to be treating me as a local club caller. I agree that if we had used wisdom in introducing the new material that we used at dances, that we would not have needed the level system, and we might have accomplished a great deal by just establishing the 68-term list, which we call mainstream, and give the rest a challenge. Let the caller who wants to workshop choose and wisely introduce the new term without embarrassing either my dancers or me. Unfortunately, that isn't what was happening, and I'm not convinced that it would happen today if we went to what Gary has suggested. I don't believe that they would be any more responsible now than they were then, And my dancers would continue to come back to me and say, why didn't you teach me whatever it is that Joe Schmunk workshopped, or that Joe Schmunk called at his Saturday night dance? I also find that the level system in my particular home situation, and here I move to the other club I call for regularly, which is in Manchester, New Hampshire. In that setting, we teach a class that until this year has been 25 lessons. This year I told them I wouldn't do that anymore. But the dancing season for that club starts in September and ends in May. And that's all that I can teach, because in the New England area, we both use school halls and stop dancing in the summertime. And so I teach to my class in 31 lessons the straight vanilla version of the mainstream list. I am unable to include all of the variations, and that proves not to be a problem for my graduates, because all of the variations are not being danced in our area when mainstream dancing is advertised. This particular club offers a 2-level program. Twice a month they dance on Friday night at the mainstream level. The other 2 Fridays they dance a +2 workshop and a +2 dance. Many people attend both programs. There are a group of people, including last year's graduates, who dance only at the mainstream level and will enter the workshop, the +2 workshop program, if they wish, whenever they wish. But we provide a multi-level program, and because the dancers know what to expect, we are able to satisfy the interests of both the very experienced dancers, of whom there are many in this club, and the newer dancers, and those experienced dancers who choose not to be high-frequency dancers. And I have found it very helpful to be able to make known to those dancers what to expect when they come to each evening. For me, that has been the primary advantage of the level system, and I have been particularly pleased to note that the dropout rate from our classes in that particular club is quite low, in sharp contrast to the other club that I was describing, where they dance a +2 level and graduate a 30-lesson class, who have been exposed to some of the +1 terms and can only survive in the club program if they attend a summer workshop, which is available but not as conveniently as the class was. In that environment, there are real problems. But I don't believe those problems result from the level identification system. I believe they result from the unwillingness of the club to acknowledge the obvious gap between what new people are taught and what the experienced dancers want for a club program. I would suggest that our problems in dropouts are the result of peer pressure. And we have always had peer pressure. I have seen it time and again in our Callers Association. We had a discussion back when CALLERLAB was starting to establish the level system. We had a long discussion, one of our meetings, about whether the level system was needed. Our conclusion was that in the New England area where we dance, anyone who had been dancing 2 years already had a level system clearly identified in his head. When you went to the Yankee Twirlers, the dance was a reasonably high-level dance. When you went to the Alamand Eights in Manchester, the dance was a pretty basic level dance. And experienced dancers knew the character of each of the clubs. They already had their level identification system. The only people who didn't get the clue were new graduates. And they got repeatedly burned by going wide-eyed to an unidentified, complicated dance. I think the level identification system has provided me with a tool that I can offer to my class graduates to help them defend themselves. And so what I would urge that we learn to deal with the problems that result in dropouts, particularly the unrealistic gap between class and club, and not blame that on the level system. Rather, let us look for what really does drive the people out. And just as an aside on that, and to trigger your discussion, we were sitting in the Research and Development Committee meeting this morning and reviewing what we knew of surveys that had been taken to investigate the reasons for dropouts. And of the 3 or 4 surveys that we knew of, all had turned up reasons other than the complexity of the dancing as a primary reason for dropout. The complexity of the dancing indeed contributed, but contributed to dropouts in less than 25% of the statements that dropouts made about why they left. The most common one was the time pressures of other activities and or family needs and sickness. I wonder if our dropout problem is indeed related to dancing as much as we think it is. And with that, I will conclude my comments and ask you, when you have a question, sit up in one of the front 3 seats here, and let's keep all the questions on the microphone so that we can hear your comments as you make them. You want to start? Do it. I want you to come here.
First of all, Jim, you talked about the some of the reasons for Mark Nichols, Medford, Oregon. You talked about some of the reasons on the polls that had been taken, and you said that the time pressure, as far as family, was one of the major reasons that there was such a high dropout rate. Okay, my thoughts are that the time pressure would not be a factor if they did not have to dance so much in order to keep up with that level. That was just a comment.
That's a comment. Good point. Anyone else? We have another one.
Ben Pugsley, Boise, Idaho. A couple of observations. One, our quarterly selections. A lot of people are using them as regular club material. People can dance them without a workshop, which I don't think was what CALLERLAB intended us to do with the workshop material. These become known, they're dropped, they move up to the plus list. Before long, our dancers who've been with us for a few years feel they know a certain number of moves on the plus list already, and there's an upward pressure to go ahead and pick up a few more. We're already halfway there. One of my most successful clubs was a club that I could use. We learn them, we dance them that night, workshop them, walk them, and forget them. I'm inclined to agree that levels have caused us some problems. I'm sure they've resolved a few, but maybe they've created more than they've resolved. The peer pressure, I think, is greater when you have levels than when you didn't. I'm for finding a way to reverse it, if there's one to find. Thank you.
Thank you. One aside, in the +2 club that I call for, we devote a portion of each evening's program to workshop. And the terms that we are workshopping now are from the A1 list in a non-progressive workshop. We do the same thing that you were suggesting. We do them for tonight. They never see them again after tonight. It has been a well-received program, and I think in part because it overcomes an argument that I used to hear frequently in workshopping things was, what's the point of learning them if we'll never hear them again? The fact that these are coming from the A1 list says to the people, we could hear them again if we wanted to move on. I have found a fairly strong response from the people in this club saying, we don't want to move on because we've looked at these and they don't thrill us. You want to comment on that, Gary?
Yeah. Don't you think, though, in fact doing that, by taking something from the advanced list, that you are either directly or indirectly encouraging that list? And whether they decide to go ahead or not go ahead, the fact that their caller decided and made it known to them that this was coming from the A list, and you had selected that from the A list, and it was there, and it is an established list, and it is there for them if they wish to go, that you are in fact encouraging them on into a higher level, which again creates more peer pressure. If they were taught something, as the gentleman said, with no obligation whatsoever, enjoy it to now. It's not on, for now. It's not on any list. You may never ever see it again. You will not be expected to know this if you want to go to the plus. You will not be expected to know it if you go into the advanced. This is just for now and only now. I think that you would be creating less of a peer pressure problem in the levels themselves.
All I can say in response is that it has not appeared to work that way in this particular situation. I've been surprised, in fact, by the number of people who've come to me since we instituted this program and said, I don't really want to try that level. The other thing I think we forget is to recognize the number of dropouts that we used to lose off the top of the program before we had available more complicated dancing. I think a fair number of people who now move up into advanced levels and stay in square dancing in earlier times dropped out of square dancing because they were forever relearning the same things. We got this one next, and then we'll get to you.
I'm Fred Goodsell from Moran, Wyoming. And Gary, you've mentioned something here in the other meeting and here that was new to me. And so I'll give my comments and immediate feelings on what you said, which is, as I say, new to me. First of all, I got the impression in the beginnings of your talk that you were talking about the people coming in to the square dance movement today, and we have offer them anywhere from 25 to 40 weeks of class, which they've got to get through. And I got an inclination, or I thought I understood from what you were saying, that this is not fun. I think that classes are fun. At least I hope the classes are fun, and I hope that the people have fun in the classes, and that they actually are square dancing from the very first day that they start. And so I don't think the fact that they have to go through 25, 30, 40 weeks of lessons indicates that they're not going to have a good time during that period of time. Secondly, you hit very hard the concept of someone coming in and wanting to dance with their friends. And there's absolutely no question in my mind but what many of our dancers come in because of friends. They are recruited by friends. That is our best recruiting tool. No doubt about that. But my own mental picture is that people will normally have more than one or two couples of friends. And if they are really this good a friend with these people, that the higher level, the people who are in at first, may wait for them. If they're not really that good of friends, really bosom buddies, then the fact that this particular couple who introduced them to square dancing is not the fact that they are dancing up here and the newer couple coming in can't get up to them. I don't see that that's really going to have that much of an effect, personally, because they're going to hopefully develop new friends within the square dance community, or other people who they have known at work or whom they've known at church or some other place. They're going to meet in the class and be happy to stay with them. The third comment that you made was, as our levels have developed, we have in black and white all these things which used to be brought up for one night, we might get some pressure, as Jim said. The local caller would get some pressure from the national caller to use these things. But now they're in black and white, they have to be used. Granted, if you are calling +1, +2, A1, A2, you have to use that list. But I don't think the dancers are being forced to go up there. I think my opinion is that these higher levels were created for people who are dancing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week. And I'm not sure that if we took the mainstream program, kept it, and threw everything else above that up into challenge, that you're going to solve the problem. Because I think the people who are dancing 3 and 4 nights a week are going to have only 2 places to go, either mainstream or go up in a challenge, and Lord only knows how high they would have to go there. So those were my immediate comments.
I would very much like to respond to that. In the first place, I did not intend, and I'm sorry that you took it that way, intend to create the thought that square dancing and lessons were not fun. In saying that we lose 75% before we ever get started, I think we do that beforehand. I think that when we say you have to take lessons for 10 weeks, 20 weeks, 30 weeks, if you don't tell them, it's still a con job. If you can get them in there, you know that we can sell them. We can make them have fun from that first night. And if we can get them in there to start with, then we got our foot in the door. If we can keep them 3 nights, we got a pretty good hold on them. If we keep them 10 nights, we got a stranglehold on them. Well, we got them forever. And we really do. You know that. Until graduation, yeah, righto. Until they see that they have to go and that there's other lists on up here. And that's where it's at. Because I don't know how it is in your area, but in going across the general mainstream of the country, mainstream level as designated by CALLERLAB is not the mainstream of dancing. You have a minority of people at the mainstream level. In fact, you will find very few areas, and I think George might, in a outlying area, could comment along on that line, that do not have the opportunity, as they do in some metropolitan areas, to have a mainstream and a plus level and a mainstream quarterly level and all of these different sections for them to progress through. You have the transition period from beginners classes into club level, and the club level is right about +1 with some extras out of +2 on it.
Gary, let's attempt to add some facts to the situation as best we can. I was at a Board of Governors meeting a couple of days ago and got concerned about this question asked there. What proportion of the country offers a solid mainstream program? The consensus was that it was like 60 or 70% of the country had a solid mainstream, not the soft +2 that you described, program available. What I want to know is, from those of you here, how many of you come from areas where there is a solid program of dancing available for new graduates at the mainstream level? With or without quarterlies, I don't. Quarterlies are experimental. How many of you come from an area where there is no reasonable mainstream program available? I mean a place where a new graduate can go and dance mainstream. Not an isolated club. I mean that within reach of most class graduates there is a regularly available program of mainstream dancing. How many of you do offer that option? And how many do not? Okay, how many areas do offer a program of mainstream dancing that's available to most class graduates? Mainstream only. Okay, how many come from an area where mainstream dancing, straight mainstream dancing, is not reasonably available to a new graduate? Well, it looks to me about 50-50. Which way? Okay, let's. Next comment is here. You can come and join our line if you would, or you.
I would just like to know of these people who do, what type of an area are they functioning in or working in?
The areas where mainstream is available.
Yes, where it is. The rural, where we at? Big town, little town. These people that do have it. Where they from?
Okay, let me ask those of you who have the mainstream program available again to raise your hands. Now, how many of these are in metropolitan areas? Eugene, Oregon is just under the metropolitan area size. That's a metropolitan area. Okay, that's a metropolitan area. So most of those programs are in metropolitan areas. Now, they're in rural areas. Sorry, I incorrectly interpreted the data. So the places where mainstream programs are available are rural areas.
Well, we're at that now of this area. How many they shut down during the summer period or have a year-round program going rather than just the summer? Well, you laugh, I know, but he gives a figure of 60% have a mainstream, and I personally don't think it is in the metropolitan, or where the bulk of our dancers are. If you want to say the bulk of our dancers are in metropolitan or large areas. And that's what we're talking about, I think.
Well, that may be what you're talking about, but there are a whole bunch of people here who are from rural areas who are finding that they do have mainstream available and that their programs are satisfactory. I may not be well, but
For 10,000 dancers or for 100,000 dancers, now, how are we going to set this out?
one of the problems I see is that we don't know whether we're talking about 10,000 or 100,000 in either of those areas. And on the Research and Development Committee, that's one of the things we're trying to find out is where is the dancer population? We don't know.
That's why I was curious what you had here from the hands raised and the numbers of where you were at.
I don't think we can tell. What we know is that the mainstream programs are available in the rural areas, and the areas that do not have them are primarily the metropolitan areas. And that certainly is my experience in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, too. I got him first, and then you can join the line, please. I want to give as many of you a chance to speak as I can.
It's kind of rough in a way to... Oh, I'm Bob Elling from San Leandro, California. It's kind of rough in a way, but the problem is that they're both right at different times, okay? We did create a monster with a level program, but at the same time it was a necessity in some areas. We needed something. We came on too strong, too fast, but we have it. We have to live with it. We have to learn how to work around what we have now. Talking about working around it, Jim described his situation where he had a multi-level situation going in networks, and he had a second club that was not, and having trouble keeping the newer dancers in. I can say the same thing, except I have to say I'm in California. Almost identically the same. He talked about his solution of teaching some advanced calls. Okay, it's an identical solution I had, and it worked for 2 years. The third year it falls apart. Okay, they start saying, how come I'm working a call that I worked last year and the year before? And Bob, we're getting tired of that. So I switched from doing that after 3 years of doing that, which did work very well the first couple of years, to going on to experimentals, almost doubled the size of my club. And I have them not look at calls that are worthwhile keeping, have them vote on the ones we should drop. Okay? They let go easier. Okay, so you kept one call. You keep it into the next month. You bring in a couple new experimentals. You compare which ones do we drop, which one will we keep. They eventually got to drop it. And they give it up because they wanted to. And it's really helped me. My clubs have grown. I had made a comment on how it was working a couple of years ago. People were surprised that in a period of 8 years I went from 2 squares to 4 squares. And I told them at that time 2 years ago that club had 20 squares in it, and everybody was very well impressed. 2 years later, that club has 34 squares in it. And we're looking at more for next year. And if anybody has heard a record that I produced for Coyote for Gary, you won't believe that anybody would come to dance to me. Okay? So, but thanks to Jim Mayo, I took the attitude if I've come here not to, I tried to teach my dancers well, but my main purpose there is not to teach them well, but to entertain them well and make sure they have a good time as best that I can do. And I use the good teaching to try and aid that, not using entertaining as a method of making better dancers, but good teaching as a better way of entertaining people. And that's what I think is important.
Thank you, Bob. We have more comments? Yeah, I got one here.
My name is Paul Tufel from West Virginia, West by Golly. We had a problem here just recently with my own club. The club says we want a higher level of dancing. Okay, I asked them, because we had a big meeting over it. I have a mainstream. We were down to 1 square. We're now got 5 squares in two-year period of mostly outside folks. But what we did is we done strictly 68 with experimentals, and then I would call 1 + 2 tip during the evening. They in turn said that was okay when I took over their club. We had a meeting about a month ago. They says, we want a higher level. If you don't give us a higher level, we won't pay you anymore. I says, okay, what level do you want me to call? Well, we want you to call a higher level. Well, how high the level? Do you want me to call APD? I says, I called roll away with a half sachet and track 2, you can't do it. Or single file circulate 1 spot, coordinate, you can't do it. What do you want me to call? Well, it ended up we was right back to where we started from. And they still love it. And we've grown, but I do not call any garbage, as I call it. I stick strictly to the experimentals. And it's been working great. The people have a place to go. The new dancers have a place to go. But in our area, we have never stuck a level on any of our clubs. We tried it a couple of times as callers, but it hasn't got to first base. So we call to let them have fun. And I might add that we have no place in our area for the new dancers to go once they've graduated. I would say we've lost over 50% at least of our new ones, our graduates, every time from a couple of the clubs, because they say they graduate them at in May or so. They know the mainstream program. They know some experimentals. They don't know any +1 or 2. But the caller says, go out and dance. Have a good time. As soon as they go out and they get bombed, the next thing you know, they've quit. So in turn, I've tried to start a mainstream club. I don't know what's going to happen. But, you know, it's going to take the backing of all the callers and all the dancers. One club tried to raise their level. The caller, he tried to keep it at mainstream only. He's been calling for 20-some years. He says, we're going to lose him if you do. But there were some people that forced him to raise his level in that club. He has lost 50% of that membership of that club. And the people that wanted him to go up higher are going out to most of the other dances anyways. So in turn, he's down to less than 2 squares in his club now. So it's a problem.
Thank you. Let's get a comment from our other panelist, Bob Wilson.
Yes, I think, you know, we could have 101 failure stories or success stories here. Where I live is 20 miles from the Wisconsin border in Illinois, and I call for a mainstream, quote, quarterly selection club in Illinois and a mainstream quarterly selection club in Wisconsin, as well as a +2 club of my own in Wisconsin. And there's a sharp contrast between the type of dancing between that 20-mile area. In the Illinois club, it's on the naval base there in Great Lakes. We are, quote, quarterly selection club, but yet we do not call a quarterly selection dance because there are 18 clubs in the Lake County area, and I would say only 1 or 2 of the clubs are, quote, +2 clubs. And yet everybody is not dancing in those mainstream clubs a mainstream level. They're calling either a mild +1 or a full +1 or a mild +2. In the Wisconsin club, the members of the Wisconsin club are members of my +2 club. They comprise the majority of the people in the +2 club. In their mainstream club, no +1 or 2 is allowed to be called, and the president of the club will cite the caller if he calls out of that realm. And they dance at both clubs and enjoy both levels. So it's a real sharp contrast between just 20 miles away. And I think we can find success stories and failure stories and go on all day, really.
Well, just a few notes that I've taken along here. We're saying that peer pressure is one of the biggest problems that the dancer faces, is peer pressure. But in prescribing these different levels, we have created ourselves. We are prescribing for these dancers peer pressure. Not to the degree that it does now. On the other hand, you made a statement that you're not sure that it would the problem that you had before would not arise again. And I almost have to disagree with that just from the results of what we have done here with the level system that we have done right now. If you are dancing in a advertised plus hall, very, very few people will go in there and call something off of another list without workshopping. There's a few problems with that, but I think it's really a minority. The people have become so workshop conscious through these level systems that I think that would almost be non-existent. The other problem, that it's not a problem for me because this is my livelihood and I try to designate as many nights as I can to it. But the other problem that you have with the different levels is the difference. You've got this problem. You either have to have a mainstream night for your beginners to dance at and a plus level night for the other people that want to go higher. And you have to designate more of your time for that. If you are not in this in a full-time basis, as I am, then it becomes a problem with you as a caller to find another night, find another hall, and find another time for that program. These are problems that we have, and especially in the rural areas where a lot of people have to drive 50 to 100 miles one way there and back to meet every 2 weeks, it becomes a big problem to make that transition from class into club that is doing a soft +1 or a hard quarterly selection plus or a soft +2. It becomes a big problem to find enough time to devote to that and enough a program that will work for those people that they would enjoy giving up an extra night and driving that 100 miles over there and back again at a different time. So I still, don't get me wrong, when I made the statement that I would take it all and shove it to the other people and take the mainstream and go with it, I have worked with your program. I call advanced right now. I workshop advanced right now. I work beginners right now. I've tried to work within it, and I've tried to adhere to the system. But in backing off and looking at it, I'm just not sure that we've gone in the right direction. I just think we need to take another strong look at it again.
I don't think we should ever stop looking at things. Would you like to add comment? Did you move up to get in microphone position? You get the next one after. No, come ahead.
Okay, I'm Glenn Carnes from Pittsburgh area, western Pennsylvania. Really, I'm just on the edge of the greater Pittsburgh area. Belong to Pittsburgh Area Callers Association. and I have no solutions. It's interesting, though. Certainly it's interesting to hear comments from all over the country, just exactly the same as we're experiencing at home. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned, and that is the fact that the majority of our Callers Association, which is like perhaps Paul's a member, perhaps 40 in number, the majority of those callers are not CALLERLAB members. We need a better education. We need more members, as a matter of fact, from that area. There in that area of Pennsylvania, I think Gary knows that the mainstream of square dancing there is not mainstream either. It is somewhere, you might say, a soft +1, +2 with very little, if any, APD. As a matter of fact, the clubs are urging the callers to get them through +1, +2, get into the club, do it in 35 or 40 sessions, which, of course, can't be done with a good job in APD. So, as a result of that, you're up against floors lots of times where you can call anything from standard position on the +1, +2 list, do a swell job of peel the top, but call peel off, you've got all kinds of problems. I believe that's all I have to say. I just wanted to make a comment as to what was going on in that part of the country. Thank you.
Well, let me suggest at least one thing as our next speaker comes up, and that is that perhaps this soft +2, which is mainstream, is not all bad. Just because we have a level that allows all position usage doesn't, I think, in my mind, force us to use it.
I'm Steve Kickert from Joseph, Oregon, and I'd like to pose a question to Gary. I agree with what you say, but I am curious to know how you would shove these people into advance, and how you would explain to them why you're putting these calls there, and what are we going to do with these people when we get them up there. I think that's a problem. Some of the callers, I was in the mainstream meeting yesterday. I think that's part of the problem, that the callers, as I picked it up down there in the Los Angeles area, were having, what do I do? This is what these people are dancing, and this is the majority. Do we start brand new from scratch, and what do we tell them?
I really wish I could answer that. I really and truly wish I had the answer to that. If I had the answer to that, I would not be working 14 sessions a week at my RV park trying to stay up with every level that there was, and I'd have a full house every night. But I don't have the answer to that. I only posed a question to this committee and this discussion here and a couple of others that I've had the opportunity to speak at. I only posed the question to get some discussion on it. We have done a tremendous job in getting where we are right now with the plus levels and with the concerted effort that we have put to it right now. If this is, in fact, a problem, I believe it is. I'm not sure that all of you agree with me. And if you don't, that's fine also. And if we say, hey, this is fine, Shoemake, you're out of line, you're in left field, well, I'll get back in line because I've got to live within the system. But I want to pose this question to you to get you some thoughts into it, because with everyone's concerted effort that we have gone as far as we have right now, but if it's the wrong direction, let's back up and get going in the right direction and get everybody's input into it and get going on the right direction so that we can eliminate the problem if in fact there is one. About what you said on using part of the level or the calls off of it goes back to what I'm advocating all along. We don't need the list. If you're going to use, in fact, what you want to off of +1, +2, then you really don't need the list to begin with. Why do we prescribe this list to CALLERLAB, in fact, if we're not going to use it? This is what their input is, or this is what they're receiving from CALLERLAB. This is the list for +1. This is the list for +2. This is the quarterly selection list, and this is the A1 and A2 and C. If, in fact, they are not supposed to adhere to those lists, just teach what they want to off of those, then in fact we don't need them.
I think there's a difference between what you teach and what you call, and I'm not suggesting that you don't use the lists. What I suggested was that we are not required to use all position versions of the material on each of these lists. I think it behooves us, when we teach mainstream, we must teach the entire mainstream list. But all position was the thing I was... My issue is the one that Bob raised, that I think we make dancing too complicated for our dancers, and that we ought to concentrate on making them have a better time. But you're next.
My name is... Okay. My name is Fred Schultz, and I'm from Nanaimo, British Columbia, which is on the island. And I agree with Gary here, about 99.9%. Only thing, I'm still a great believer that our experimental movements should be moved up to the +1 and +2 level. I just can't see... I mean, a lot of callers spend half an hour or three-quarter hour of their program of teaching us a certain movement, and it's gone off the list after a year. I would rather give the dancers a good dance, because if I'm going to a dance and I'll pay my bill, and it's advertised as a mainstream dance or whatever, if you don't advertise as a mainstream plus a workshop, if you do that, that's fine. But I guess if you don't, I would be quite hurt if I went down to a dance and the caller spends half of his program workshopping on quarterly selections. And maybe a little thought I could pass on that what we're doing in our area, in my club, and a lot of the clubs in our area, we have a half an hour workshop before the dance. And it's advertised in all our magazines, and people who wish to have a little extra show up to it. And we workshop different things, not necessarily quarterlies, but something else. And it doesn't affect our dance, basically our dance. And we found this worked very well. We had the better attendance at the dances, and the people enjoy more so, because dancers come forward and say, well, we had we workshopped something and it's never see again. So this is the only comment I have. Yes.
You say that you workshop half an hour before the dance. What percentage of your people that attend your dance attend your workshop?
I would say about 75%. Okay.
George Gargano from Minnesota. Let me preface some of these remarks by the belief that I have that you can't hardly slice anything thin enough that there's just one side. So this gets kind of... I don't know if we're going to come up with a good solution. But about the lists... we have the same situation that a lot of you seem to have. We've got the list, but it's a kind of a funny list, because at the mainstream dance, mainstream seems like it has come to mean include the quarterlies. So now what was mainstream and quarterly selections was extra. Now the quarterly selections are added in. So if we end up with 10 quarterlies, that like we are pretty close to at this time of the year, it's not 68 anymore, it's 78. And then after the convention, it'll sag back down again. And we are build fences, because the people do come to be with their friends, but their friends are learning, are walking away from them while the new people are learning. Their friends are going to the +1 workshop, and if they're not progressing past the +1, even if they just stay there, their proficiency is increasing. And if you've got somebody that's been dancing +1 for 3 or 4 years, just because a new dancer learned the +1 list in the last 6 weeks, they still are not equal with their friends. And then next thing you know, they're saying, well, Joe used to be a friend of mine, but without really realizing it, they start to shy away from him, because if they get their friend in their square with them at a +1 dance, he drags the level down. They can't get through the square, and that doesn't really help anything. And I really believe they do come to dance with their friends. If they can't dance with their friends, they're not going to come there. So I think you need some time to wrap this up. I could probably talk here for an hour or so. If you let me. Okay.
Okay, I got to say two things. First of all, Bob Elling again from San Leandro, California. What Fred said, let's listen. We've got to listen not to what dancers say, but what dancers do. He tells me they don't want to do the quarterlies. They don't want to do an experimental that might not be used later. But where does he say the bulk of the dancers come to? When they have an early workshop. And that he does something that might not necessarily be used again. He's telling us that's where they'll come. They'll say they don't want to, but that's where they'll come. Remember that. Second point, peer pressure. That we all know is the major big problem in dancing. And we talk about we've got to educate the callers. I had this problem when I first started the program, the same type of program that Jim did. The first 2 years, very unsuccessful. What happened was my dancers were coming over. Gee, wait till you learn. Wait till you come over to +2. Wait till you come in. You just... Finally, after getting nowhere, 2 years, it sort of held its own. I sat down one night with the club and I said, hey, listen, when you go over and tell these people how much fun you have, they think they're not having fun. And remember, if you encourage these people to come over, there's a 50-50 chance they'll quit square dancing altogether if they don't make it. And I explained this to the club, had an open talk with the whole club. It's been 3 years now since that happened. My club members, and I remind them occasionally, my club members never do that anymore. And I actually have people leaving +2 to join mainstream because they've accepted that after years. But it's something that doesn't happen. You have to make it happen.
Gary Shoemake, one little final note that is a very big problem with me, and would be obvious it would be a bigger problem for me because it is my livelihood, but I'm sure that each and every one of you have experienced it to some degree, that you have been booked at another place to call in another town or at another club. When I used to go down the road, we used to go in and have a square dance, and the new dancers came out, and the club dancers came out, and the hot rodders came out, as we called them then. Everybody came out. And I found a level, some way, somehow, whether it was using a experimental from left field and getting them through it, calling it directional, or whatever I had to do. But I found a way, somehow, to make those people happy. If I go into a town now, if it's a +1 dance, the mainstreamers will not come in. And the advance will not come down. If it's a mainstream, the majority of the plus won't come down, and not any of the advance will come down. And if it's advance, ain't nobody coming up there except those people that's in it. So we have segregated our dancers to the point right now that not only is it affecting our program, but it is affecting the attendance to all the dances. I think that you would agree to that point. And I definitely see it. My accountant sees it, and my tax people see it.
I don't know as I have the perfect solution, but this is Bob Wilson from Waukegan, Illinois. But I think as callers, if we're calling for a quarterly selection level club, you're bound to have people that are going to be wanting to dance the plus program. I think we have to provide this program for them some way, somehow. Whether it be divide your club, and if they dance twice a month, make one of your dances a quarterly selection dance and the other a +2 dance.